We have a special treat today. I've asked Cindy Springer to come and tell us a little bit about self-forgiveness. And I would just want to say that truly it is a miracle that she is with us. Thank you.
Oh, goodness. My name's Cindy, and a lot of you know me. I've grown up in this church since I was about 12. Dorothy is my grandmother. A lot of you have been through some of my experiences, either with me or with my family. And I'm a crier, so I'm going to try to keep it all together. But, my story is I never quite felt like I belonged. And I was a runner a lot when I was a teenager. I felt this void that I didn't quite know how to fill. I did music a lot. Music was a huge part of my life. Played bells in the church, which probably saved a lot of my life back then, to have that commitment and be part of something. And I, like I said, I ran away a lot, caused a lot of pain for my family. They didn't quite know where I was, if I was, what was going to happen to me. And now that I have kids, I know what I can, thank God my kids aren't running away yet. But as a parent, now I can feel what they felt, or kind of have a lot of sympathy and some regret there. And as I got older and had a kid at 17 years old in high school, I was a baby, having babies. And I did a lot of damage to her throughout my selfish choices. I am in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And, I kind of left my kids. It's okay.
You're great. You're just great.
My oldest is now 18. I have an 11-year-old who's almost 12, going on 20, and a little boy who is 8, almost 9. My oldest, I couldn't parent her, so she mostly lived with her grandparents because her dad was in the military, and that was during him being overseas in Afghanistan and some different places. And so, I lived in Washington and did a lot of damage to myself there. I didn't really talk to my family very much. The only way my parents knew where I was whether or not I was in jail. And, I did a lot of really bad things. For me, what it took is I had to give up. I had to give up and stop fighting and stop running. And I was incarcerated for a little length of time, and I found out I was pregnant with my son. And I knew God spoke to me. I don't always listen. I don't listen to people who are there, let alone somebody from up there. And so, he spoke to me and he gave me that peace that, everything was going to be okay and things were going to change. And so, I had a lot of pain that I was trying to hide through my addiction, mostly the pain I caused my children. And so, when I got clean and sober, I wasn't able to see my oldest daughter. I didn't know if I would ever see her again. And my middle daughter was adopted by my parents. And I didn't know if that was going to happen, if I was going to get to see her. I didn't know, but something had to change. And, while I was incarcerated, I did a lot of work. I went to church. I got into some kind of treatment. And, what I had to do is I had to look at myself and my actions and what I had done to people, not just what people had done to me. Because for me, it's easy for me to forgive you, but it's hard for me to forgive me. And so I had to decide that this wasn't going to be my life anymore, because for me, in order to forgive myself and to forgive others, then something has to change. I can't just, like the kid said, say sorry and just go about doing the same stuff over again. And so I had my son, and then I moved back here, and my grandma, the amazing person she is, let me come live with her. She didn't have to do that. I caused a lot of damage to them. Thank God I brought Kleenex for the family too. Because they forgave me, even though I didn't know if I could forgive myself. My grandma's grown up in church, and she knows how important that is. And so I moved here. I did everything I could to change, to prove to them and to everybody else that I was different, and that I didn't deserve forgiveness, but that I was trying to be better. And and through that process and through healing with my kids and healing with my family, I was able to slowly start forgiving myself for the things that I had done to them and to myself. I damaged myself too. I didn't just damage them. And so, I in recovery, we call it making amends. So I had a lot of people to make amends to, obviously. And on that, they really want you to look at forgiving yourself too and making amends to yourself. And so, like I said, for me, it doesn't just magically go away. I don't just forgive myself today and then tomorrow I don't have to do that again. It's an everyday thing for me. As I see my kids grow up, and I'm sure most parents relate to this, as you see your kids grow up and struggle and have problems, and you accept some of that responsibility. And so for me, that's especially true because of the things that I did, and I left them or wasn't there, and so today all I can do is that action piece and show them that I love them, that I'm not going anywhere, and that if they need me, I'll be there. And same to my family who took my kids in, being there when they need me to be there, showing up. And I went on a walk to Emmaus, and that was one of the turning points in trying to forgive myself, because they taught us that, if God can forgive you, who are you not to forgive yourself? Because God forgave us before we even did it, and He doesn't want us to suffer and live in pain. And so, I just pray all the time for God to help me forgive those things that I did and for Him to heal my children. Because as they grow and change and become people, even though I don't want them to grow, I get to see the people that they're becoming, and I get to be part of that, And so the biggest piece for me is that the hardest one for me is my kids, and that is something that I struggle with. But God gives me peace, like Linda said. Forgiveness is that peace, and that's all I have, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wait. So now you understand when I said it's a miracle that she's with us. And so when you see her after church, just to express your gratitude to her for sharing, I know that was a brave thing to do as well. Thank you. So this whole month we have been talking about forgiveness. The first Sunday we talked about God's forgiveness. And as I shared with the kids, the pattern in the Bible is typically I forgive you, and then sometimes there's an I'm sorry in there, but not always. But the forgiveness comes first. Then the second week, last Sunday, we talked about the prodigal son, and my favorite title for that story is The Father of Two Sons. The Father of Two Sons. The first, of course, went wild, and the second one, then the father got to stand right beside that second son and the older son and describe how to forgive, how to live a life of forgiveness. And then today we want to talk about forgiving ourselves. And next Sunday we'll discuss forgiving when it's hard. I know all of it is hard, but especially when it's really, really hard. Today I want to read the scripture passage. It's just one verse. It's from 1 Corinthians 15, verse 9, and I don't have it up there because it's really short. But I want to give you a little bit of story ahead of time before I read this passage. It's about the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, who was originally named Saul. As some of you may know the story, he was a devout Jewish leader who sought out heretics in the Jewish faith. And we now, in our Christian story, describe that as persecution of the Christians. And so he sought out people that were deviating from the traditional Jewish faith, and of course that would have been Christianity because it was quite different at the time. And so he persecuted Christians when he was named Saul, and he even to the point of bringing them to trial. And some of those resulted in those people dying for their faith. Now, there's this great story of Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus, this light, that somehow, some kind of presence of Jesus with Saul that changed him totally and made him go in a totally different direction. Now, throughout human history, this is one of those rare stories, real change in an opposite direction. So instead of persecuting, he became a strong believer. There's just so few stories like that in human history. Anyway, so he became a Christian, and for the rest of his life, he had to live with the fact that he had persecuted the very thing now that he gave his life to. And he mentions it a couple of times in his writing. The New Testament, just a little educational moment, the New Testament the order is that, we have the gospel stories, the 4 gospels. Then we have all these letters to a particular church in a particular city. And a lot of these letters are written by Paul. A lot more are attributed to him than he actually wrote. But there's at least 6 or 7 that are definitely written by Paul. Now, the voice of Paul is also evident in the Gospels because those letters were sent to particular churches. The Gospels were written in particular churches' locations. So more than likely, some of those churches did not have all 4 Gospels. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the influence of Paul is greater than the number of pages in our Bible. He could be potentially the most important voice beside Jesus in our New Testament. So he's really an important voice. So he had such a change from persecution to believing and to becoming a leader. He writes to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 9, he says this about himself. And for those who have difficulty with self-forgiveness, you might hear this in these words. For I am the least of the apostles. Who am who am not worthy to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. He calls himself the very least, who's not even worthy to be called a leader. Apostle would have been a leader because he persecuted the church of God. Now, this passage comes right in a long description of God's grace, of God's forgiveness. And here he is unloading his own pain and suffering, his own loathing, his own need for self-forgiveness. So we've talked a lot about forgiveness, and I want to just make it really simple how to forgive. Now, this might sound trite and just snappy, but I don't underestimate how hard this is. So the rhythm of forgiveness goes like this: relax, get over yourself, relax, let it go, relax, we're all going to die, relax, suffering cannot be avoided, relax, no one has totally got it all together, relax, no one is totally in control, relax. Just keep relaxing into those things that really hold us back, into those statements that are not really true, right? No one has it all in control. Go ahead, get over yourself. Just let it go. Just let it go. Now, I know that a lot of you have real stories of pain and suffering. And so that recipe of relax, get over yourself, that recipe, I don't mean for that to cause anyone any harm, any second guessing of your own suffering. But what I am trying to show is that everyone that holds on to that pain, that suffering, past the moment that it happens, it is holding you back from the moment that you're living. So in other words, the rhythm of forgiveness can bring you into a rhythm of renewal and real life. So I have a short personal story. It's not near as beautiful as Cindy's wonderful self-forgiving story. When I was in junior high, that's the age that, all the really difficult things that happen at school begin, right? When I was in junior high, I'm a twin. My twin sister, Brenda, and I, we were always together. Not surprising. But in the clique environment of junior high, I was with these girls, and Brenda was right there, and the girls said, you can stay, but we really don't want Brenda to stay. And my jaw dropped, and I did not say anything. And they repeated, "We don't want you here," to my twin sister. And she walked away, and I stayed. And she never said anything to me about that. But I never forgot it. And every time she and I had any trouble, any struggles, which there were a lot, I always wondered if it was because of this. And I never forgave myself. And I never asked for forgiveness. I never brought it up again. But it's still one of those things that I wonder about my relationship with my twin sister. And I feel bad that I didn't step in. I feel bad that I didn't apologize. I feel bad that I didn't try to do something different. So how to bring the rhythm of forgiveness in that would be, when that image comes up, try to relax. I could say something like, a lot of crazy things happen in junior high, right? Or, that was a long time ago. Or, siblings always struggle. or something like that. Just relax. Try to rewrite that story with not as much energy, not as much tension, not as much pain. Self-forgiveness, it often comes in about 4 different categories. It can fall under one of these 4 categories. One is you failed to do something that was really important, a really important life task. Maybe it's you failed to be a good mother, failed to be a good sister like me, good father, whatever. Or you didn't get that job that you had always dreamed of, or you failed at some life task. That's one category of pain for self. Another category is that we have pain over not taking action when it was obvious that something needed to be done. I could have stepped in for my sister and protected her, and I didn't. So when we could have acted and we didn't, and we feel guilty about that. That's the second category of pain. It could be that we were the cause of pain, that we hurt somebody in some way. Physically, mentally, verbally, that we caused the pain. It could be self-destructive acts. Addiction is definitely self-destructive act. Some other way of hurting ourselves, self-destructive act. So those are kind of the 4 overarching ways that we can cause self-pain or have self-pain. And those are places that we need self-forgiveness. You know, the interesting thing about forgiveness, God's forgiveness to us, is, as Cindy said, it came before we were even born. It was already present in our life when whatever happened, happened. God's grace and forgiveness was already present. We just have to live into it. Well, so often we can hear that God forgives us before we allow forgiveness of ourselves. So in one sentence, we'll say, yes, I believe in forgiveness of sins. And then the next sentence is, but I just can't forgive myself. I just cannot let go of my story. One of the tricks to self-forgiveness, to any forgiveness, one of the tricks to forgiveness is to letting go of our rule that we broke. Whatever rule it was that we believed in, that we thought was broken, if we let go of that, things will ease up and forgiveness can be possible. Some examples of rules that we might live by is, if I work hard enough, I can be perfect. Right? That's one I live by. If I work hard enough, it'll go really great. That's one of my rules. Another rule is, if I am kind enough, I won't ever hurt anyone. I don't ever want to hurt anyone. You know what? Hurting is a natural part of life. I have to let go of that rule. Another rule might be, I really want to succeed in everything I put my effort into. I really want to succeed. I really want great things to happen. It's not always going to be that way. Not always. Here's another rule. Nothing in my past can be changed. I can't change that. But in truth, we can change our experience of our past. We hold on to those things just like Paul did. We hold on to those things as if they'll never change. Yes, we can't go back and redo them, but we can change our memory of them, the way that they hold on to us. So those are just examples of rules that, sometimes get broken that cause us to have trouble with forgiveness. So in some ways, self-forgiveness is harder than just forgiveness, and in other ways, it's easier than just forgiveness. You might can already guess this, but it's easier to forgive someone else because you can't control them, right? I can't really make them do what I want, so I'm just going to forgive them. So in that way, it's a little easy. But self-forgiveness, as Cindy mentioned, it can be harder because we have to follow it up with some change. We have to follow it up with, I'm going to have to do something about that self-forgiveness. Ability to change our own behavior and amend our actions, change our life. We can forgive, we can learn, and we actually can grow. And in fact, all of that together is easier than beating ourselves up and staying stuck. That's the alternative. What is so beautiful, and this is probably my favorite sentence of the whole sermon, so all ears. Shame, embarrassment, and guilt are emotions that do little to help us to grow. When is the world going to wake up to that? Shame, embarrassment, and guilt are emotions that do little to help us grow. So when we can forgive, then we can grow and be different. Learn to do good rather than feel bad. We had in the prodigal son, we have in the story of Jesus, hero stories. They're heroic forgiveness. You can have heroic forgiveness in your life when you forgive yourself. So what does that look like? You forgive yourself, and in that love and forgiveness, you make a change in your life and write your hero story. It's really that simple. The most beautiful thing about forgiveness, and this is true in Cindy's life and in other people's lives, is forgiveness is contagious. That's why AA works. Forgiveness is contagious. It's one of the greatest reasons why we come to church. It's that we hear these wonderful stories of the Bible and ask it to be contagious in our life, take hold of our life, make us different. When we forgive, other people will forgive. The Bible is really a story of one person that influenced another person that influenced another person. It is so contagious. It's so beautiful. So on the cross, Jesus said, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So Jesus was allowed to die without the heavy burden of grief. He was able to let go and forgive. Paul, one of the stories of his actions against the early church when he was Saul, was with the leader Stephen, with the missionary Stephen. If you read in the book of Acts, Stephen is arrested for his Christian faith, and he is taken out and stoned because believing in Jesus. And the passage says that all the people that were stoning him put their coats at the feet of Saul. So Saul was there. And so he was watching Stephen being killed by stoning. And in his very last thing that he said, Lord, do not hold their sin against them. Lord, do not hold their sin against them. So Paul got to see forgiveness. He got to witness forgiveness. Now, I'm certain that when he was on the road to Damascus, that was also part of his experience in Jesus, was forgiveness for what he had done. Shame, embarrassment, and guilt do not help us grow. Forgiveness, freedom, brings better growth and stronger growth. To have a life like Paul was because he experienced forgiveness. So wherever it is in your life, let us bow our heads in prayer. Gracious God, wherever it is in our life that we experience hurt and pain and hang on to our story about ourselves that's not helping us, Lord, we ask that you breathe into that place your light, your freedom, and beautiful, beautiful love. May we walk into this moment newly made. In your name we pray. Amen. Frankie, if you'll lead us into our next song, please stand.